Hello, we're investigating the Arturia Moog Modular and breaking it down component by component, and today we want to talk about the low frequency oscillator, the L.F.O. Here it is. Well, there are actually two of them. There's one over here and there's another one up here. The idea of a low frequency oscillator is that it's not really supposed to generate tone in its own right. It's supposed to apply a change to something else, and it's the something else that ultimately resolves in a tone being heard, something that you can actually hear with your ears. The low frequency oscillators typically doing stuff at frequencies that are below human hearing, but that doesn't mean they're not useful, not by a long shot. So let's just plug one in and see it working immediately. What sound have we got? Okay, there's our sound. Completely flat, static sound. We're going to take our L.F.O output and we're going to use a sine wave output. So this is going to be a wave, a sine wave. And what's it going to do? Well, it's entirely up to us. Let's change the pitch. So frequency modulation, you saw on a previous video that we can alter the pitch of a tone by plugging something into the FM slot. And now when we play a note, what's going to happen? Okay. See this red light? Pulse, 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 pulse. The low frequency oscillator is applying that wave to the pitch of the sound and making the pitch change according to its shape. If I speed the L.F.O up, it's currently at 1.24 Hertz. Okay. Really slow. So that's the whole idea of an L.F.O. It's operating at these really low cycles to give you this evolving sense of motion in the sound. See, this setting here is it's set to mid. If we set it to low, just drag the button over to low. Now it's going to operate over a very long period of time. You get the idea. And we could also set it to MIDI in order to sync up with our song, whatever the BPM of the current song is. Pretty obvious stuff. So let's set back to mid. Typically, you'll find L.F.Os working in the 1, 2, 3 Hertz range. Not exclusively by any means, but very frequently, very often, that's where you'll find them doing their good stuff. Now, it doesn't have to be a sine wave. Low frequency oscillator can generate lots of different kinds of waves. So let's take that away. Let's have it be a sawtooth instead. What do you think this is going to do to the tone? Okay. Square wave. On or off? Or high or low, really? Random. Goodness knows what this is going to do. It's random. Okay, so you get the idea that there's 5 different waves to play with. Again, more often than not, you're going to find the sine wave being used more often than anything else, because that consistency that you get, a constantly evolving at a single steady rate, is what you want more often than not from your L.F.O. Now that's a very dramatic effect, and you wouldn't be able to use that in many musical circumstances. But if you pull the amount of that modulation down to very small amounts, speed it up a little bit, now we have something that's actually it's beginning to become like musically usable. little vibrato effect. That's nice. So that's being very subtle with your frequency modulation, but we don't have to just apply frequency modulation. We can do any sort of thing to it. Let's have a go at amplitude modulation. So now I'm going to change the volume of the thing to variable control. Because I'm increasing it by 10% from where it was previously set. So I'm just going to pull this down a little bit. Okay, so that's now applying a tremolo effect. In other words, changing the volume cyclically. What else can we do? Let's get rid of that one and throw it over here. So now we're affecting the low pass filter. There we go. It really doesn't take long to start getting an interesting sound. See, when I first plugged it in, when I first pressed the key, you know, it wasn't very pleasant. But now, after not many seconds, okay. If we switch to a multi-mode filter, we can send the L.F.O into the resonance. Let's do the resonance and frequency at the same time. Okay, great stuff. L.F.Os are brilliant. What else can we do? We can tell it to do something a little bit more reasonable. Let's switch back to our low pass filter and go back to this thing. Okay. What if we don't want it to kick off straight away? Well, put a delay on it. So let's wait a second before applying any oscillation at all, ish. And after that second, let's spend another second fading in. Now that can be used for particular effect when you're doing amplitude or FM changes. If we come back over here, there we go. So now so it waits a little while, it waits a second doing nothing at all, and then over the next second brings the vibrato in. So the great flexibility with the env and delay settings to get that subtle pure tone to start with and then bring the L.F.O in. What else can we do? Well, we can plug L.F.Os together. You can send one L.F.O into another. So let's have this L.F.O up here send a sine wave into the frequency modulation of this L.F.O. So now what's going to happen is that the speed of the L.F.O is actually going to be variable. So we don't want this effect to be too violent. I'm just going to pull this down a little bit to start with. Look at the really fast and then really slow. what's going on. The L.F.O, operating at a cycle of 1/10 of a hertz, in other words, it's taking 10 seconds to complete a single cycle, is affecting the L.F.O, the master L.F.O, from its base value of 2.4 hertz up to an amount 30% beyond that on the control. So whatever 30% is on this, it takes us up to about 12 hertz, because these are all logarithmic scales. So you have to fiddle around with these things manually. Don't want to get your calculator out. Just mess with stuff until it sounds good. So if I really crank this up, it's kind of unusable for a while. But if we be a little bit more sensible about it, then the fastest it ever gets is still usable. So now that effect can be fed into something a little less dramatic than frequency modulation. Let's send it back into the filter. Okay, if we pull this rate really low at its base value, we're going to get like deep pulses, and then as it speeds up, and then slows down again. So that's using one L.F.O, a variable wave, to feed into another L.F.O, a variable wave, and then those two results combine to have an ultimate effect on whatever it is that you want to send it to. You can send these sources to any number of, you can send these outputs to any number of destinations. Finally, one more set of controls in the L.F.O, and I use this very rarely, so this isn't something to get too hung up on, but you can also vary the width of the pulse when you're in pulse mode. So here we have a square wave, send that over here. Okay, so that's a square wave, a pulse wave, being applied to the modulation. It's either on or off basically, and you can control how often it's on as compared with off. 50%, 10%. And then obviously you have the option to send a modulation controller into the pulse width. So if we take this sine wave back out again into here, now the width of the pulse that's coming out of that L.F.O and ultimately going somewhere else is going to vary according to the rate set by this sine wave over here. So as the wave is oscillating, it's catching different points on the duty cycle, in whether the wave is on or off. It's making the wave be different widths. There's a wide one, thin one, wide one, medium. So it's catching different points on the wave. Like when I was talking about the filters, I said 99% of the time I use low pass filters. 99% of the time when I'm dealing with the L.F.O, I'm taking a sine wave out of it and I'm sending that sine wave somewhere, and I'm having that organic wavy kind of goodness. So that's the L.F.O. When we get to starting to look at some of the presets that come out of the box, you'll see L.F.Os being in lots of different uses. That they're really flexible, because it's a great way to dynamically change something on an ongoing basis. Envelopes are pretty much, they start, they fire, they do a thing, and then they're done. With LFOs, you've got a constantly shifting pattern that you can really take advantage of to sculpt some great sounds. So there's another one of our building blocks in place, the L.F.O. Thanks very much for watching this, and I'll see you next time.